Ivan Pavlov was born in 1849 in Ryazan, Russia, to a large, poor family. Pavlov began going to seminary, but after studying Darwin and Sechenov, he decided to go to the University of St. Petersburg to learn about natural science. It was there he decided to become a psychologist. Ultimately, Pavlov's physiology of digestion research would earn him the Nobel Prize. For his research, he implanted small stomach pouches in dogs to measure the production of gastric juices when the dogs started to eat. Pavlov was able to condition the dogs to salivate when he would turn on a metronome. Ultimately, Pavlov made the basis for conditioned reflexes and classical conditioning. Classical conditioning was the first experimental model of learning. Burrhus Frederick Skinner was one of the most influential American psychologists. Born and raised in Pennsylvania, B.F. Skinner first attempted to be a professional writer. After limited success, he changed his plans and studied psychology at Harvard University. While at Harvard, Skinner searched for a better means of behavior study. Creating the operant conditioning apparatus, or Skinner box, was his answer. The Skinner box allowed him to study an animal relating to its surroundings. Rats were his first subjects. He experimented to see how rodents found and used a lever in a box that gave them food. He used the box later with pigeons to see what behavior patterns developed. The pigeons pecked at a disc to get food. Skinner resolved that some form of reinforcement was needed in learning new behaviors. After he completed his doctorate research work at Harvard, he published his findings in the behavior of organisms. Pavlov's early contributions were mainly about animal learning because of the kinds of experiments that he did. The effects of classical conditioning have extended into many arenas, including schools. The principles of classical conditioning have influenced and laid the foundation for preventative control strategies used in the classroom. Classical conditioning can help with the behaviors before the behaviors, so to speak. While Pavlov's most popular contribution to education was classical conditioning, there are some other lesser-known impacts. Pavlov developed the concepts of generalization, discrimination, and extinction. Webster's defines generalization as the act or process whereby a learned response is made to a stimulus similar to, but not identical with the conditioned stimulus. For example, I have a dog that barks like crazy if someone knocks on the door. Eventually, she started barking when she heard any knocking sound like hammering or knocking sounds on TV. Discrimination is the improvement of senses to make distinctions between similar stimuli. For example, in cattle herds, a cow will only respond to the call of its own calf, even if other calves are in the area. Extinction happens when an organism who has been reinforced in doing or saying something stops being reinforced. What happens as a result is the stopping of that behavior in a short amount of time. I use this all the time with students. If a student starts having a temper tantrum and they are obviously seeking attention, I would ask them to stop. But the extinction comes into play when I simply ignore their tantrum and they quit. They weren't getting the attention they were seeking, so the tantrum stops much quicker. Skinner believed that education had basically two reasons for being. One was to get students interested in learning, and the other was to teach a range of verbal and nonverbal behavior. He brought to teaching an engagement in behavior, not just a passive receipt of information. Skinner was a major proponent of positive reinforcement over punishment. He felt that it was far more successful at altering and forming behavior. Skinner said that what people learn from punishment is how to avoid being punished. This view had major effects on education's rote learning and punitive discipline. Skinner thought that it was necessary for teachers to learn effective ways of teaching because they are the ones that are mainly in charge of changing student behavior. He wrote about why teachers can be unsuccessful in his book, The Technology of Teaching. In his book, he wrote that teachers have not been given an in-depth understanding of teaching and learning. Without knowing the science underpinning teaching, teachers fall back on procedures that work poorly or not at all. In a comparison of Skinner and Pavlov, both made major contributions in the area of behaviorism. Skinner actually stood on the shoulders of Pavlov. Both found a number of similarities with education and the training of animals. Skinner and Pavlov have far-reaching results into the everyday functions of school. Just think about it. Every time you've heard a school bell, a gym whistle, or a teacher get audibly the attention of students, that is the work of Pavlov in action. Likewise, when a student can tell you the steps to solve a mathematical equation, perform a science experiment, or writing a paragraph, that's the influence of B.F. Skinner. Yet while both were involved with conditioning, Skinner's focus was classical conditioning and Pavlov was operant conditioning. Pavlov's work was based on the idea of association with a neutral stimuli, the bell for example, while Skinner's was based on positive and negative reinforcement. Also, Skinner's work involved learned responses to an environment rather than involuntary responses to stimuli like Pavlov. Pavlov's classical conditioning is used many places in education. If a teacher is repetitive and consistent with stimuli, eventually students will learn to behave in a desired way. For example, the teacher, before conditioning, instructs students to be quiet, they get quiet. Then the teacher claps and the students don't get quiet. Then during the conditioning, the teacher claps and instructs students to be quiet and they get quiet. Finally, after the conditioning, a teacher simply claps and the students are quiet. This happens effectively all the time in schools, and students may not even be aware of it. Skinner's work influences me every time I've taught, whether I've realized it or not. One of the first things I look for is the attention of students. I look for behaviors that show me that I'm connecting with them. Eye contact, posture, and responsiveness are just a few. Just like Skinner, I believe that observing people's behavior is the best way to figure them out. I'm teaching a student and they are just not getting it, and for whatever reason, I say something different, the students just become more focused, their perspective is different, they suddenly understand. The light bulb goes on. That shows that they've learned, that they've changed their behavior. Another influence of Skinner is in positive behavior intervention and support. PBIS is everywhere in America's schools today. Whether you call it Gotcha Slips, Perk Parties, Behavior Bucks, or Character Kid of the Month Award, Skinner's work has directly influenced positive reinforcement in schools. It's gone way past the point of being some type of educational fad. PBIS has become a cornerstone in teaching practice. The schools I have worked with, they want to start students out with positive reinforcement so much that administration actually tells kindergarten teachers to give out twice as much PBIS as the other grades just to get kids accustomed to the strategy. Meanwhile, the rest of the teachers are supposed to give out more at the beginning of the year than the rest of the year so that the kids will get excited about it. Pavlov and Skinner had more influences in education than either ever conceived. They both changed how we think about teaching students. I wonder who will stand next on their shoulders for the coming innovations in learning.